They laughed when he walked into the boardroom, just a janitor in a worn denim jacket, but by midnight, his invention had silenced everyone, and by 2 a.m., it had made the coldest billionaire in tech weep like a child. The world of innovation has seen many stories of rejection and triumph, but none quite like this. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Robert Jenkins wasn't supposed to be in that meeting, not in his faded blue uniform, with hands still rough from industrial cleaners, and the smell of pine sol barely masked by the discount cologne his daughter had given him last Christmas. Not in Horizon Technologies' sleek, glass-walled conference room where executives in tailored suits discussed millions as casually as weather. But there he was, 63 years old, standing just inside the doorway, clutching a battered leather satchel against his chest like armor. The conversation in the room stuttered, then halted. 6 heads turned, 12 eyes assessed and dismissed him in seconds. "Excuse me," a voice cut through the silence. Alexander Wells, CEO of Horizon and 32nd wealthiest man in America, according to Forbes, placed his Mont Blanc pen down with deliberate precision. "This is a private meeting." Robert didn't move. After 3 decades of invisibility, of being the man who emptied trash cans while brilliant minds talked over him as if he were furniture, he had promised himself this moment. One chance to be seen. "I know, sir. I've been waiting 3 months to show you something." His voice was steadier than his hands. "I filled out the innovation submission forms, called the office 26 times, left 14 messages." A woman with razor-sharp bangs and sharper eyes, Diane Chen, Chief Innovation Officer, glanced at her tablet. "How did you get past security?" "I work here, Mom. 15 years next month." He shifted his weight, the floor seeming to tilt beneath him. "I clean this room every night at 9. Recognition dawned on a few faces. The invisible man suddenly having a face, a name, a voice. "While we appreciate your initiative," Wells said, his smile not reaching his eyes, "we have channels for this sort of thing. The suggestion box on level 3. I tried that too, sir. 27 submissions." Robert stood straighter, the weight of his dignity heavier than fear. "I have something that might help people. I know I'm just the janitor, but just the janitor," echoed Jason Pierce, VP of Product Development, his laugh cutting through the room like glass. "Listen, old-timer, we're in the middle of a $12 million acquisition discussion. Why don't you come back when you finished your MBA? Laughter rippled around the table. Robert felt it like a physical blow, but he'd weathered worse, much worse. After burying his wife, after working 3 jobs to put his daughter through college, after midnight shifts mopping floors, while sketching designs on discarded printer paper, laughter couldn't touch him. 2 minutes, he said quietly. "Just 2 minutes of your time." Wells checked his Patek Philippe watch, a timepiece worth more than Robert's annual salary. "Security is already on the way, I'm sure. Let's not make this uncomfortable for anyone." Robert felt his chance slipping away. 15 years of night classes in community college engineering programs, thousands of hours in his garage workshop, his daughter Sarah's voice echoing in his head. "Dad, they need to see this. It could change lives." He opened his satchel with trembling fingers and pulled out what looked like an ordinary water filter, except it wasn't. Its design was both elegant and strange, with components arranged in patterns that defied conventional engineering. Parts salvaged from discarded tech in dumpsters behind the building. Circuitry he'd taught himself to build by watching online. Tutorials on the ancient desktop computer in his basement. "It's a water purification system," he said, placing it on the conference table, "but different from anything on the market." Jason Pierce snorted. "Water purification? Are you kidding me? We're a cutting-edge technology company, not a kitchen. Appliance manufacturer." Please, Robert said, his voice unwavering now. Just let me demonstrate. Before anyone could object further, the conference room door opened. 2 security guards stood there, apologetic but firm. "Mr. Wells, is there a problem here?" Wells glanced at Robert, then at his watch again. Something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a flicker of conscience, passed across his face. 2 minutes, he said, nodding at the guards to wait. "Then we all get back to work." Robert exhaled. 2 minutes to prove 15 years of midnight inspiration wasn't delusion. He reached into his bag again and produced 2 water bottles, one filled with murky brown liquid, the other empty. "This water," he said, holding up the brown bottle, "is from Westside Creek. The EPA classified it as hazardous 3 years ago. Industrial runoff, agricultural chemicals, heavy metals." He poured the foul liquid into his device's intake chamber. The executives leaned back, some wrinkling their noses at the smell. "Most filtration systems use multiple stages," Robert continued, his voice finding its rhythm. "Carbon, ceramic, reverse osmosis. They remove contaminants, but they're expensive, need frequent replacement, waste water, and can't handle certain chemicals." His hands moved with practiced precision, adjusting settings on his device, unlike the polished prototypes normally. Showcased in this room, his invention bore the honest marks of creation, soldering marks, repurposed parts, improvised solutions born of necessity rather than convenience. Mine uses a different approach, a biomimetic membrane system modeled after how mangrove roots filter salt water, combined with a catalytic process I developed that breaks down complex organic compounds without chemicals or replacement filters. Pierce rolled his eyes. "Mangrove roots? Did you get your engineering degree from National Geographic?" Robert didn't respond to the taunt. With quiet confidence, he flicked a switch on the device. It hummed to life, a soft blue light illuminating its core. The contaminated water began moving through transparent channels, transforming before their eyes. No dramatic bubbling or mechanical sounds, just silent, efficient transformation. "The system uses 90% less energy than conventional methods," he continued. "It can process water with contamination levels 10 times the EPA hazardous threshold, and it costs less than $50 to manufacture at scale." 30 seconds later, clear water began flowing into the empty bottle. Robert capped it, held it up to the light then, in a move that made several executives gasp, drank it down in 4 long swallows. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Completely safe," he said, placing the bottle on the table. "I've tested it with samples from industrial sites all over the city." The room was silent. Even Jason Pierce's smirk had faded. Diane Chen had put her tablet down, her eyes fixed on the device with undisguised interest. "That's..." Alexander Wells began, then stopped. The billionaire rarely found himself at a loss for words. "Impossible," finished Dr. Amara Jackson, Horizon's chief research scientist, speaking for the first time. She leaned forward, academic skepticism warring with what her eyes had just witnessed. "What you're describing would revolutionize water treatment technology worldwide." Robert nodded. "That's the idea. And you developed this while working as a janitor here?" Wells asked, the question genuine rather than mocking. "Yes, sir. I audit engineering classes at the community college, and I've read every technical manual and research paper thrown in the recycling bins here for 15 years. Robert's eyes met Wells directly. "You'd be surprised what people throw away." Dr. Jackson stood, approaching the device with the careful reverence of a scientist encountering something beyond current understanding. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward it. Robert nodded. As she examined it, the atmosphere in the room transformed. Skepticism gave way to curiosity, dismissal to consideration. Even the security guards by the door were watching with interest. "The membrane construction is unlike anything I've seen," Dr. Jackson murmured. "And this catalytic chamber, how did you stabilize the reaction without platinum group metals?" "Engineered biochar with embedded nanoparticles," Robert replied. "The carbon structure comes from discarded coffee grounds from the break room." A ripple of disbelieving laughter, different from the earlier mockery, moved through the room. Wells leaned forward. Mr. Jenkins, Robert Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins, you understand that if this performs as you claim, it could be extraordinarily valuable." Robert nodded. "I do, but I didn't build it to get rich." He reached into his satchel once more and pulled out a folded newspaper. He smoothed it on the table, revealing a headline: "Water crisis deepens in Riverside District, thousands without safe access." "I live there," he said quietly. "My neighbors fill bottles at public fountains in other districts because our water makes children sick. People working 2 jobs can't afford bottled water or expensive filtration systems." His eyes swept the room. "This isn't about money. It's about fixing something that's broken." Alexander Wells studied Robert with new eyes. For the first time, he truly saw the man who had emptied his trash and cleaned his whiteboards for years. The calloused hands, the intelligent eyes, the unassuming dignity that no amount of dismissal had diminished. "Your 2 minutes are up, Mr. Jenkins," Wells said finally. "But I believe we need to continue this conversation." He turned to Pierce. "Cancel my next meeting." Pierce blinked in surprise. "But the Westridge acquisition call—" "Cancel it," Wells repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And Dr. Jackson, I want a full analysis of this device by tomorrow morning." As the room burst into activity, Robert stood still, overwhelmed. After years of closed doors, ignored messages and rejected submissions, someone was finally listening. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that in just 12 hours, his invention would cause the unflappable Alexander Wells to sit alone in his penthouse at 2 a.m., staring at test results with tears streaming down his face. That it would awaken memories the billionaire had buried decades ago of another poor neighborhood, another contaminated water supply, and another child lost to preventable illness. But that part of the story was still unfolding. Dr. Jackson approached Robert, extending her hand. "We should get this to the lab immediately. Would you be willing to walk me through the functional principles?" Robert nodded, barely trusting himself to speak. As they prepared to leave, Wells called out, "Mr. Jenkins!" Robert turned. "Why didn't you take this somewhere else, after we ignored you for so long?" Robert considered the question. "Because I built it here, sir, piece by piece, while you were all working late or coming in early. In a way, this place, all of you, helped create it, even if you didn't know it." He smiled slightly. "Besides, my daughter says Horizon Technologies' mission statement promises innovation that serves humanity. I took that seriously." Wells blinched, recognition of the gap between corporate rhetoric and reality flickering across his face. "Well," he said finally, "it seems you may help us live up to that promise after all." As Robert followed Dr. Jackson out, he passed the security guards who had come to remove him. One nodded respectfully. The other whispered, "Is it true? Can that thing clean up Riverside's water?" "That's the plan," Robert replied quietly. "My mother lives there," the guard said. "Thank you." Robert nodded, emotion tightening his throat. One acknowledgement after years of invisibility. One thank you after countless dismissals. It wasn't fame or fortune that had driven him through nights of failure and frustration. It was the simple hope that he could solve a problem others had deemed either too small for profit or too large for solution. Outside the conference room, Dr. Jackson was already asking technical questions about flow rates and filtration mechanisms. Robert answered each one with the precision of someone who had spent years perfecting every detail, every component, every possibility. Down in the research lab, a place he had only ever entered to clean, scientists gathered as word spread. The janitor with the impossible invention, the water filter that defied conventional engineering, the man they had walked past 1,000 times without truly seeing. Under fluorescent lights, much harsher than the soft ambience of the executive conference room, Robert's invention faced its first real scrutiny. Contaminated water samples were prepared, not just the one he had brought, but others collected from around the city, each with different pollution profiles. The municipal treatment plant uses a 12-stage process for water with half these contamination levels, one scientist remarked, studying the test samples. And even then, they can't remove certain pharmaceutical compounds or forever chemicals. Robert simply nodded. Run whatever tests you need. It works. The confidence wasn't born of arrogance, but of thousands of hours testing and refining in his garage workshop. Of days spent in the public library reading research papers most people couldn't understand. Of failures that had taught him more than successes ever could. As the tests began, Diane Chen approached him. While we're waiting, perhaps you could tell me more about yourself, Mr. Jenkins. 15 years at Horizon, and I don't believe we've ever properly spoken. Robert recognized the question for what it was. Part genuine interest, part corporate due diligence. His invention had suddenly made him a person worth knowing. Not much to tell, he said. Navy veteran, engineering technician on submarines. Before budget cuts, downsized my division. Took what work I could find after that to support my family. He paused. My wife died of cancer 12 years ago. Raised my daughter Sarah on my own. She's finishing her PhD in environmental engineering at State University now. And she knows about your invention? She helped with some of the technical calculations, Robert said with quiet pride. Taught me how to use computer modeling software when my hand-drawn designs reached their limits. Across the lab, someone called out, "First test complete. Contaminant levels. Non-detectable." Dr. Jackson's eyebrows rose. She immediately ordered a second test with different equipment, unwilling to trust a result that seemed too good to be true. As the evening progressed, the lab filled with more people. Word had spread throughout the building. Researchers from other departments, engineers who had never bothered to learn the name of the man who cleaned their offices. Even Alexander Wells returned, standing silently in the background, watching test after test confirm what Robert had claimed. One of the younger scientists turned to him. "Mr. Jenkins, the biomimetic membrane, how did you stabilize it without industrial fabrication equipment?" Robert smiled slightly. "You know the 3D printer in the engineering lab that was scheduled for disposal last year? I asked if I could have it instead. Fixed the extruder head, modified it to work with the materials I needed." Another scientist joined the conversation. "But the catalytic matrix would require precise temperature control during formation." "My kitchen oven," Robert replied, "modified with parts from discarded microwaves. My daughter helped me build a PID controller to maintain temperature within 2 degrees. As each revelation emerged, the picture became clearer. Working night shifts and weekends, salvaging discarded equipment, learning complex scientific principles through sheer determination, creating in a garage what multi-billion-dollar companies with state-of-the-art labs had failed to develop. At 11 o'clock, Dr. Jackson called for silence. The lab went quiet. Dozens of eyes turned toward her as she held up a tablet displaying the compiled test results. "We've run 17 distinct tests using EPA protocols and several experimental methodologies," she announced. "The Jenkins device has successfully removed all tested contaminants from all water samples, including those with concentrations 5 times higher than our worst-case scenarios." She turned to Robert. "Mr. Jenkins, Your invention doesn't just match existing technology. It exceeds anything currently available by several orders of magnitude. A rare smile crossed her usually serious face. Quite simply, you've created something revolutionary. A spontaneous burst of applause filled the lab. Robert stood awkwardly, unaccustomed to being the center of attention, even less to being celebrated. Alexander Wells stepped forward, silencing the room with his presence alone. Mr. Jenkins, I owe you an apology, not just for today, but for 15 years of walking past you without seeing you. He extended his hand. Horizon Technologies would like to acquire your invention. We'll ensure it reaches those who need it most, beginning with Riverside District. Robert hesitated. With respect, Mr. Wells, I've read enough discarded contracts in your recycling bins to know how these acquisitions usually work. Patents get purchased. Technologies get shelved if they threaten existing profit streams. A murmur moved through the crowd. Wells' expression tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I didn't create this to make money, Robert continued. I built it because children are getting sick from drinking tap water 2 miles from this building. Because families like mine are choosing between paying water bills and buying groceries. He picked up his invention, cradling it with the care of a parent. I want to work with Horizon, but only if this reaches people who need it, not just those who can afford it. The room went silent. In 15 years of cleaning executive offices, Robert had overheard enough conversations to know such demands rarely ended well for those making them. Wells studied him for a long moment. Then surprisingly, he smiled. You know, Mr. Jenkins, in all my years running this company, you may be the first person who's been completely honest with me. He nodded thoughtfully. I think we can come to an arrangement that satisfies both of us. Robert's shoulders relaxed slightly. I'd like that, sir. Excellent. We'll meet tomorrow to discuss details. Wells checked his watch. It's nearly midnight. I think we've all had enough excitement for one day. As the crowd began to disperse, Robert carefully packed his invention back into his satchel. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, contracts, and complexities far beyond anything he'd prepared for. But tonight, for the first time in years, he felt something close to hope. Dr. Jackson approached as he prepared to leave. You've created something extraordinary. Here, Mr. Jenkins. Thank you, he replied simply. May I ask one question that's been bothering me? When he nodded, she continued, why water purification? Of all the problems you could have tackled, why this one? Robert was quiet for a moment. When my wife was sick, her immune system was compromised by the chemotherapy. Our tap water, the same water everyone in Riverside drinks, gave her infections that complicated her treatment. His voice remained steady, but pain flickered behind his eyes. The doctors told us to use bottled water or install an expensive filtration system we couldn't afford. He closed his satchel. After she died, I promised myself no one else would have to make that choice if I could help it. Dr. Jackson nodded, words inadequate in the face of such motivation. As Robert left the building, not through the service entrance as usual, but through the main lobby where executives and visitors came and went, the night security guard looked up in surprise. Mr. Jenkins, everything okay? It's past your shift. Robert smiled. Everything's fine, Miguel. Better than fine, actually. That's good to hear, Miguel replied, clearly confused by the janitor's late departure and the unusual spring in his step. Outside, the night air felt different somehow. The same city, the same stars, the same distant sound of traffic. But Robert Jenkins was no longer invisible. His years of midnight work, of being overlooked and underestimated, had culminated in this one perfect moment of validation. He pulled out his phone and called the one person who had never doubted him. Dad. Sarah's voice was groggy with sleep. "Is everything all right? It's almost midnight." "It's better than all right, sweetheart," he said, his voice finally betraying the emotion he'd held in check all evening. They're going to make it. They're going to help us get clean water to Riverside." Sarah was suddenly wide awake. "You showed them, and they listened. They more than listened. They're going to help produce it." "Dad!" Her joy burst through the phone. I told you they'd see how amazing it is once you got past all those gatekeepers." Robert smiled, watching the lights of the city spread out before him. "You were right, as usual." "Tell me everything," she demanded, fully awake now. As Robert began recounting the events of the evening, he couldn't know that across town, Alexander Wells had received the comprehensive test results on his private server. Couldn't know that the billionaire was staring at metrics that confirmed a breakthrough beyond anything his company had achieved in 20 years of research. Couldn't know that Wells had found himself alone in his penthouse, looking at photographs of a little sister lost 40 years ago to contaminated water in another poor neighborhood. A loss he had buried beneath ambition and acquisition, a wound he had never allowed himself to acknowledge. Couldn't know that in just 4 hours, at precisely 2 a.m., the man who had everything would find himself weeping uncontrollably as he realized the janitor he had ignored for 15 years had created not just a revolutionary technology, but a chance for redemption. That part of the story was still unfolding, like clean water flowing into places long dry, bringing life back to what had been forgotten. Alexander Wells sat alone in his penthouse office, the city lights sprawling beneath him, like a circuit board of human existence. It was 1:17 a.m. The comprehensive test results from Dr. Jackson's team had arrived on his secure server 30 minutes ago, and he hadn't moved since opening the file. The data was irrefutable. Robert Jenkins, a man who had emptied his trash for 15 years, had created something that Horizon's R&D department, with its annual budget of $3 billion, had deemed theoretically impossible. Not just a better water filter, but a paradigm shift in purification technology. Wells swirled the scotch in his crystal tumbler, untouched since he'd poured it. The amber liquid caught the light from his desk lamp, fracturing it into golden prisms. He was not a man accustomed to being surprised, certainly not by someone he had never truly noticed until today. His phone buzzed. Diane Chen. "It's late, Diane," he answered, his voice betraying none of the turmoil beneath his composed exterior. "I knew you'd still be up." Chen's voice was crisp, efficient even at this hour. "Have you reviewed Jackson's report?" "Yes." "And?" Wells took a breath. "And it appears we've been ignoring a genius." "Not just a genius," Chen replied. "A genius with a moral compass and personal connection to the problem he's solving. The market implications alone." "I'm not thinking about market implications right now," Wells interrupted, surprising himself almost as much as Chen, whose momentary silence spoke volumes. "That's unexpected," she finally said. "What are you thinking about then?" Wells didn't answer immediately. His eyes drifted to the photo frame on his desk, digital but designed to look like antique silver. It cycled through images every few minutes: corporate awards, handshakes with presidents, the groundbreaking of Horizon's headquarters. But at this moment, it displayed a photograph he normally skipped past quickly. A young boy, no more than 10, with his arm around a smaller girl with the same sharp grey eyes as his own. "Alexander?" Chen prompted. "I'm thinking about Riverside," he said finally, "and about why it took a janitor to solve a problem we should have addressed years ago." Chen's voice softened, a rarity for the hard-driving executive. "You can't fix every problem in the world, even with your resources." "No," Wells agreed, "but I could have fixed this one." He ended the call before she could respond, something he never did. For several minutes he sat motionless, staring at the photograph. Then he opened his desk drawer and removed a leather-bound journal, not a digital tablet or encrypted laptop, but actual paper. Something older than most of his technology. Something from before. He turned to the first page, where childish handwriting had faded but remained legible. Alex and Emma's adventures. Below it, a crude drawing of two stick figures holding hands. Wells rarely allowed himself to look at this journal. It was a relic from a life he had methodically excised from his public persona. The biography on Horizon's website began with his scholarship to MIT, as if he had sprung into existence at 18, fully formed and destined for brilliance. Nothing about the trailer park outside Pittsburgh, nothing about the father who disappeared. Before his 10th birthday, nothing about Emma. He turned the pages slowly. Childish adventures documented in a child's hand, gradually giving way to more sophisticated entries. Alex's science project won first place. Emma got sick today, but the medicine made her better. Mom says the water smells funny, but we can't afford filters. He stopped at an entry from 40 years ago, the handwriting more mature but jagged with emotion. Emma went to hospital again. Doctor says her kidneys are worse. Wells closed the journal abruptly, but it was too late. The memories he had barricaded behind success and achievement were flowing freely now. Emma's tiny hand in his as they walked to school, her laugh, high and clear like bells. The way she would wait up for him when he returned from late study, sessions at the library, desperate to escape their cramped trailer, and then the hospital, the metallic smell of dialysis machines. The doctors with their sympathetic faces explaining that the industrial runoff in their water supply had damaged her kidneys beyond repair. The transplant list they couldn't afford to get on. The slow, agonizing months watching her fade while their mother worked double shifts to pay medical bills that mounted like an avalanche. Wells stood abruptly, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Pittsburgh was 800 miles and 40 years away, but tonight it felt as close as his reflection in the glass. He had buried Emma along with his past, had transformed himself into Alexander Wells, shedding Alex Wazowski and all the poverty and powerlessness that name carried. Had built Horizon Technologies with a singular drive that left no room for reflection or regret. Yet here was Robert Jenkins, unraveling 4 decades of careful compartmentalization with a water filter built from discarded parts and midnight determination. Wells' phone buzzed again. A text from Dr. Jackson. Secondary verification complete. Jenkins' device exceeds all parameters. Full report by 8 a.m. This changes everything. Changes everything. The words seem to hang in the air of his silent penthouse. Wells returned to his desk and opened his computer. He bypassed his usual corporate dashboard and navigated to a database he rarely accessed personally, Horizon's charitable foundation records. He searched for water quality initiatives. The results were robust but superficial. Donations to global NGOs, sponsorship of academic research, public health awareness campaigns in developing nations, nothing in Riverside, nothing in the company's own backyard. He expanded the search to all foundation activities within a 50-mile radius of Horizon headquarters. The list was shorter than he expected. Most focused on education, particularly STEM programs at prestigious schools, strategic investments, in future talent pipelines. Nowhere could he find evidence that Horizon had addressed the water crisis experienced by their own employees, by families living mere miles from their gleaming corporate campus. Wells checked the time, 1:42 a.m. He opened a new document and began typing rapidly. By 2:05, he had drafted the framework for a completely new initiative, the Clean Water Access Project. By 2017, he had allocated initial funding of $50 million from his personal fortune, independent of corporate budgets or board approval. As he worked, something strange happened. His vision blurred. The screen before him became indistinct. He blinked and felt moisture on his cheeks. Alexander Wells, the man the Wall Street Journal had once called Silicon Valley's Ice King, for his emotionless approach to business, was weeping. They weren't quiet, dignified tears. They came in racking sobs that bent him over his keyboard, releasing decades of grief he hadn't allowed himself to feel. For Emma, for the boy he had been, for Robert Jenkins and all the invisible people he had trained himself not to see. At precisely 2:00 a.m., as the digital clock on his desk shifted numbers, Alexander Wells made two decisions that would alter the trajectory of Horizon Technologies forever. First, the Jenkins device would be fast-tracked for production with an initial deployment in Riverside at no cost to residents. Second, Robert Jenkins would no longer be a janitor at Horizon Technologies. Sarah Jenkins had learned early in life that expectations were dangerous things. They were luxuries her family couldn't afford, like the name-brand cereals she saw other kids eating or the vacations they took during school breaks. When her mother got sick, Sarah had expected the doctors to make her better. When the treatments failed, she had expected her father to crumble under the weight of grief and responsibility. When they struggled financially, she had expected to abandon her dreams of college. None of those expectations had materialized. Her mother had died despite the best medical care they could afford. Her father had become a pillar of quiet strength rather than collapsing. And somehow, through his relentless work ethic and her own scholarships, Sarah had not only attended college, but was now pursuing her doctorate. So when her father called at midnight with news about his invention, Sarah was both elated and wary. Joy came easily. Caution had been hardwired by experience. "Dad, are you sure they're not just going to steal your idea?" she asked, sitting cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by textbooks and journal articles for her dissertation. "I've read case studies about corporations taking innovations from employees without proper compensation." "It's different this time," Robert replied, and Sarah could hear the unusual confidence in his voice. "Dr. Jackson is running interference, and Wells himself seemed changed somehow." Sarah wasn't convinced. "Just promise me you won't sign anything without having a lawyer review it. My department chair knows someone at the legal clinic who specializes in intellectual property. I can call her tomorrow." "I promise," Robert assured her. "Now get some sleep. You have that methodology review with your committee tomorrow." After they hung up, Sarah tried to return to her reading, but concentration eluded her. Her father's invention represented a decade of work, nights spent at their kitchen table drawing designs, weekends experimenting in their garage, countless failures that never diminished his resolve. The Jenkins family legacy wasn't wealth or social connections. It was perseverance bordering on stubbornness. Her mother had fought cancer with the same quiet determination her father brought to engineering problems. Sarah had inherited that tenacity, channeling it into academic achievement that had taken her further than anyone in her family had gone before. She pulled out her laptop and began researching Alexander Wells. The articles painted a consistent picture. Brilliant, ruthless, known for acquiring promising technologies and extracting maximum profit. Not exactly the type to have a sudden change of heart about a janitor's invention. Sarah closed her computer, decision made. Tomorrow, she would skip her committee meeting and accompany her father to Horizon Technologies. Some things were more important than academic protocols. Now the morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Conference Room A, the most prestigious meeting space at Horizon Technologies headquarters. Unlike the previous evening's confrontation in Tizusage, a standard conference room, This meeting had been arranged in the circular glass chamber that overlooked the city, a space normally reserved for board meetings and high-profile investor presentations. Robert Jenkins arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in the best clothes he owned: khaki slacks, a button-down shirt Sarah had given him for his birthday, and a navy blazer that had seen better days. He had debated wearing his janitorial uniform, but decided against it. Today, he wasn't coming as the man who cleaned floors, but as the inventor of something that mattered. To his surprise, Sarah was waiting for him in the lobby, dressed in a simple but professional black dress. "You're supposed to be at your committee meeting," he said, embracing her. "Some things are more important," she replied, straightening his slightly crooked tie. "I'm not letting you face this alone." Together, they were escorted to conference room A by an executive assistant who treated them with a deference that felt foreign to Robert. No one had ever called him sir in this building before. The room was already occupied when they entered. Dr. Jackson stood by a digital display showing technical schematics of Robert's device. Diane Chen sat reviewing documents on her tablet. Three people Robert didn't recognize, two men and a woman in expensive suits, were engaged in quiet conversation. But it was Alexander Wells who commanded attention. The CEO stood gazing out the windows, hands clasped behind his back. When he turned to greet them, Robert was startled by his appearance. The immaculate billionaire looked as though he hadn't slept, with subtle shadows beneath his eyes and a certain rawness to his usually polished demeanor. "Mr. Jenkins," Wells said, stepping forward to shake his hand. "Thank you for coming." His gaze shifted. "And this must be your daughter." "Dr. Sarah Jenkins," she introduced herself, her grip firm as she shook his hand. "I'm ABD in environmental engineering at State University." Wells nodded, something like approval flickering in his eyes. "I understand you contributed to your father's work." "Only the theoretical modeling," Sarah replied. "The innovation is entirely his." Wells gestured toward the conference table. "Please, both of you, have a seat. We have much to discuss." As they settled around the table, Robert couldn't help but notice how different this felt from every other moment he had spent in this building. For 15 years, he had been peripheral, a necessary function, but not a person worthy of attention. Now all eyes were on him, awaiting his words rather than waiting for him to finish and leave. "Before we begin," Wells said, "I want to apologize for how your submissions were handled, Mr. Jenkins. It represents a significant failure in our innovation pipeline, one we will be addressing immediately." Robert nodded, uncertain how to respond to an apology from a man worth billions. Wells continued, "Dr. Jackson has completed her analysis of your device. Perhaps she should present her findings before we discuss next steps." Dr. Jackson stood, activating the room's display system with a gesture. "My team worked through the night, verifying the performance of what we're tentatively calling the Jenkins purification system. Technical schematics and test results appeared on screens around the room. Simply put, it represents a quantum leap in water purification technology. The biomimetic membrane achieves filtration at the molecular level without the energy requirements or waste production of traditional methods. The catalytic chamber neutralizes contaminants that current technologies can only remove through absorption." She turned to face Robert directly. "Mr. Jenkins, frankly speaking, you've created something that shouldn't be possible according to conventional engineering approaches. The efficiency metrics alone are revolutionary, but the accessibility of the design, the fact that it can be manufactured at such low cost, makes it potentially world-changing." Robert felt Sarah's hand on his arm, a gentle squeeze of pride and reassurance. "Thank you," he said simply. Years of being overlooked had taught him economy of expression. Wells leaned forward. "Mr. Jenkins, Horizon Technologies would like to enter into a formal partnership with you to develop and distribute your invention on a global scale. He nodded to one of the unfamiliar figures at the table. Ms. Patel here leads our legal team. She's prepared several options for our potential arrangement. The attorney slid folders across the table. We've outlined 3 possible structures for our partnership, she explained. The first is a traditional acquisition model. Horizon purchases all rights to your invention for a substantial sum, with milestone payments based on market performance. She continued, the second is a licensing arrangement where you retain ownership of the intellectual property, but grant Horizon exclusive production and distribution rights in exchange for ongoing royalties. Robert opened the folder. The numbers swimming before his eyes. Even the initial payment in the first option represented more money than he had earned in his entire life. And the third option? Sarah asked, her voice steady where his might have wavered. Ms. Patel nodded. The third option is more unconventional. Mr. Wells proposed it himself this morning. All eyes turned to Wells, including those of his own executives, suggesting this was as unexpected to them as it was to Robert. The third option, Wells said, would establish a new division within Horizon, Jenkins Clean Water Technologies. Mr. Jenkins would serve as Chief Innovation Officer, with full research support and a dedicated team. The technology would be deployed through a hybrid model. Premium versions for commercial and affluent markets would subsidize low-cost distribution in underserved communities. He paused, then added, beginning with Riverside. Robert blinked, trying to process what he was hearing. You want me to work here as an executive? Yes, Wells confirmed. Your expertise and vision are clearly exceptional. Your practical approach to innovation would be invaluable to Horizon. Sarah leaned forward. And what about the Riverside deployment? What exactly are you proposing? A full-scale installation serving the entire district, Wells answered without hesitation, at no cost to residents. Robert and Sarah exchanged glances. This went beyond anything they had dared to hope for when entering the building. May, we have a moment to discuss privately, Sarah asked. Of course, Wells replied, signaling to the others. We'll step out. When the door closed behind the Horizon team, Sarah turned to her father. Dad, this is incredible, but option 3 seems too good to be true. What's Wells' angle? Robert studied the documents, a lifetime of caution, warring with unprecedented opportunity. I don't know. He seems different today, almost like he cares about more than the bottom line. People like him don't change overnight, Sarah countered. There must be something we're missing. Robert was silent for a moment, then said, maybe, but this option would get clean water to Riverside immediately. It would help the Pattersons, the Garcias, the Wongs, all our neighbors. He looked at his daughter. Isn't that why we built it in the first place? Before Sarah could respond, a light knock preceded Wells's return, alone, without his executive team. May I join you? He asked, uncharacteristically deferential. Robert nodded and Wells took a seat across from them. I sense some hesitation, he said. Understandable, given how your innovations have been treated until now. Sarah met his gaze directly. Mr. Wells, with all due respect, your company hasn't exactly built a reputation for prioritizing humanitarian concerns over profit. Why the sudden interest in Riverside? Robert tensed at his daughter's directness, but Wells didn't seem offended. A fair question, he acknowledged. The truth is, your father's invention forced me to confront something I've been avoiding for 4 decades. He hesitated, then continued, I grew up in a community not unlike Riverside. My sister died from kidney failure caused by industrial contaminants in our water supply. I was 10. She was 8. The admission hung in the air, startling in its vulnerability. I built Horizon as a response to that powerlessness. Wells continued. But somewhere along the way, I became the very thing that had destroyed my family. A force that valued profit over people's lives. He leaned forward, his usual polished facade replaced by raw sincerity. Your father's invention isn't just a technological breakthrough. For me, it's a chance at redemption. A way to fulfill a promise I made to my sister that I've been running from ever since. Robert studied the billionaire's face, searching for signs of manipulation or insincerity. He found none. I believe you, he said finally. Sarah looked between them, her academic skepticism softening in the face of Wells's evident emotion. If we accept option 3, we want guarantees about Riverside, written into the contract. Done, Wells agreed immediately. And I'll personally match every dollar of corporate investment in underserved communities with my own funds. Robert extended his hand. Then I think we have a partnership, Mr. Wells. As they shook hands, Robert couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here, from midnight shifts mopping floors to sitting across from the CEO as an equal. From sketching designs on discarded paper to launching a technology that could change millions of lives. It wasn't the money that moved him to accept, though the financial security for Sarah's future certainly mattered. It was the realization that his years of invisible work had culminated in something truly visible, something that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Wells called the rest of the team back in, and the morning dissolved into a flurry of legal discussions, technical planning, and organizational charts. Dr. Jackson outlined an accelerated development schedule. Diane Chen presented marketing strategies for different global markets. Through it all, Robert's practical insights shaped the conversation, his deep understanding of the technology guiding decisions that executives with far more formal education deferred to without question. By noon, preliminary agreements had been signed. By 1 o'clock, Robert had been issued an executive access card, his name already printed on its surface, as if Horizon had been preparing for this moment for years, rather than hours. As the meeting concluded, Wells pulled Robert aside. There's one more thing, he said, handing him an envelope. Effective immediately, the janitorial services contract for the entire Riverside district has been awarded to Martinez Cleaning Services, owned by Miguel Martinez, your colleague from the night shift. Full benefits for all employees at twice the industry standard wage. Robert opened the envelope to find the contract details. Miguel has been trying to start his own business for years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Wells nodded. Sometimes the most valuable innovations aren't devices, they're opportunities. He hesitated, then added, your official title is Chief Innovation Officer, but I hope you'll also serve as something of a conscience for Horizon. We've clearly been missing one. As Robert and Sarah left the building, through the executive entrance this time, they were met by a small crowd of researchers and engineers who had heard about the Jenkins device. Spontaneous applause broke out as they walked to Sarah's car. How does it feel? Sarah asked as they drove away, the Horizon headquarters gleaming in the rearview mirror. Robert considered the question. Strange, he admitted. 15 years in that building, and today was the first time I actually felt seen. Sarah smiled. You were always visible to those who mattered, Dad, especially Mom. Robert nodded, thinking of his late wife. How proud she would have been of this moment, how she had always believed in him when he struggled to believe in himself. As they approached Riverside, the contrast between their neighborhood and the gleaming downtown corporate district couldn't have been starker. Aging infrastructure, peeling paint, water stations where residents filled containers because they didn't trust what came from their taps. In 6 months, Robert said, this will change, not just here, but in places like this everywhere. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. You know, When I was little, I used to tell the other kids my dad was a scientist working undercover. Turns out I was right all along." Robert laughed, a free, unburdened sound that had been rare in their household for many years. As they pulled into the driveway of their modest home, neighbors waved and called out congratulations. News traveled fast in Riverside. Mrs. Patterson from next door hurried over, enveloping Robert in a hug. "Is it true?" she asked. "About the water?" "It's true," he confirmed. "Clean water for everyone, starting in a few months." As more neighbors gathered, Robert found himself at the center of a celebration he had never expected. These were the people who had seen him leave for night shifts year after year, who had watched him study engineering textbooks in the public library, who had supported his family when Joyce was sick. For them, Robert Jenkins had never been invisible. He had been an essential thread in the fabric of their community, and now his perseverance had yielded something that would improve all their lives. Later that evening, as Robert sat on his porch watching the sunset, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "This is Alexander Wells. One question kept me awake last night. Why didn't you give up after all the rejections?" Robert considered the question carefully before responding. "For the same reason you built Horizon after losing your sister. Some promises don't expire, even when keeping them seems impossible." Miles away, in his penthouse overlooking the city, Alexander Wells read the message and recognized a truth he had spent decades avoiding. Success built on forgotten promises was no success at all. It had taken a janitor with nothing but determination and moral clarity to show him that. He typed a reply. "First production meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. We have decades of lost time to make up for." In Riverside, Robert smiled at the message. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter, not just for him and Sarah, but for communities like theirs. Everywhere, the invisible becoming undeniably visible at last. The transition from janitor to chief innovation officer wasn't as smooth as signing a contract. Robert's first day in his new role began with a security guard who didn't believe his executive access card was legitimate. It took a personal call from Alexander Wells to resolve the confusion, with the CEO himself walking down to the lobby to escort Robert to his new office. "I apologize for that," Wells said, as they rode the executive elevator to the 37th floor. "Old systems die hard, both technological and human." Robert shrugged. "I spent 15 years being invisible here. Can't expect everyone to adjust overnight." Wells studied him with newfound respect. "Most people would be angry." "Being angry takes energy," Robert replied simply. "I'd rather use mine to solve problems." The elevator doors opened to reveal a world Robert had only glimpsed while cleaning, the executive floor, with its panoramic views, original artwork and hushed atmosphere of privilege. Wells led him past curious glances from administrative staff to a corner office larger than Robert's entire apartment. "This will be yours," Wells announced, gesturing to the space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A sleek desk, ergonomic chair, and state-of-the-art computer system awaited. On one wall hung a framed blueprint of Robert's water purification device, elegantly rendered by Horizon's design team. Robert stood motionless in the doorway. "This is too much." Wells shook his head. "It's not nearly enough." He pointed toward the desk. "Your team is assembled in Conference Room C. Dr. Jackson has vetted each one personally. They're eager to meet you." As Wells turned to leave, Robert called after him. "Mr. Wells?" The billionaire paused. "I don't need all this," Robert said, gesturing to the luxurious office. "What I need is for my design to help people. Everything else is just furniture." Wells smiled, a genuine expression rarely seen by his employees. "I'm beginning to think you're going to change more than water quality around here, Jenkins." Left alone, Robert approached the window, gazing down at Riverside in the distance. From this height, the neighborhood's challenges weren't visible. The cracked sidewalks, the rust-stained sinks, the children carrying water bottles to school because the fountains weren't safe. This perspective made it easy to forget. Perhaps that was the problem with power and height. They created distance from the very problems wealth was meant to solve. Robert turned away from the view. He wouldn't forget, no matter how high he climbed. When he entered conference room C 10 minutes later, 6 people rose to greet him. Dr. Jackson made the introductions. 2 engineers, a chemist, a manufacturing specialist, a public health expert, and a project manager, all highly qualified, with impressive credentials, all looking at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. "Good morning," Robert said, feeling the weight of their assessment. "I imagine this is unusual for everyone." Dr. Sophia Rivera, the public health expert with 20 years at the CDC, spoke first. "Mr. Jenkins, my colleagues and I have reviewed your device. Scientifically, it's remarkable. But I hope you don't mind me asking, how did you develop this without formal training?" The question hung in the air, professional but pointed. Robert nodded, understanding the underlying concern. "By making thousands of mistakes no one saw." He pulled out his worn notebook and placed it on the table. "And by documenting every one of them." He opened the notebook, revealing pages dense with calculations, sketches, and systematic iterations of his design. "I didn't have the privilege of sophisticated equipment or peer review. What I had was time, persistence, and problems that needed solving." He turned to a specific page. This was attempt 327, failed because the membrane tore under pressure. Attempt 328 used a crosshatch support structure inspired by how my wife used to reinforce fabric when sewing. He flipped to another page. Attempt 452, catalytic chamber. Overheated. Solution came from studying how automotive radiators distribute heat. The team leaned forward, drawn in by the meticulous documentation of a mind that had taught itself engineering principles without ever entering an engineering classroom. Marcus Chen, the manufacturing specialist, pointed to a schematic. "This repurposed 3D printer modification, it's brilliant. We've been approaching similar problems with industrial equipment costing millions, but your solution is more elegant and scalable," added Eliza Okafor, one of the engineers. "The modular design means we can deploy in context from individual households to municipal systems." As the technical discussion deepened, the initial skepticism in the room gave way to genuine engagement. By mid-morning, the team was huddled around Robert's notebook, questioning, suggesting, collaborating. Hierarchies of education and position faded before the shared pursuit of perfecting something that mattered. "I think," Dr. Rivera said after an intense discussion about deployment priorities, "we should start with a pilot in Riverside immediately, even before full-scale production. Use the original prototype as proof of concept while we refine the mass production model." Robert nodded. "The community center would be ideal. It's where many residents already go for clean water." "We'll need community buy-in," Rivera continued. "Trust isn't automatic, especially in neighborhoods that have been promised solutions before." "I can help with that," Robert said. "These are my neighbors. They know me." By lunchtime, a preliminary deployment plan had been drafted. The team dispersed to their respective departments to begin implementation, leaving Robert alone with Dr. Jackson. "They're impressed," she said. "And not easily, I might add." Rivera turned down positions at Johns Hopkins and Stanford to work. "Here." Robert closed his notebook. "I have a lot to learn from all of them." "And they from you," Jackson replied. "Your approach is unorthodox but effective. You solve problems differently because you weren't taught the conventional limitations." She hesitated, then added, "Wells wants to announce the Riverside Initiative publicly. Press conference next week. He'd like you to speak." Robert felt a knot form in his stomach. I'm not much for public speaking. The story is powerful. Robert, the janitor whose invention will help millions. People need to hear it from you. He thought of his neighbors, of families like his who had suffered while institutions looked the other way. Perhaps his voice could bridge those worlds. I'll try, he said finally, but I want Sarah involved too. She's the real academic in the family. Jackson smiled. Already arranged. Wells wants her to consult on the environmental impact assessments. He was quite impressed by her. As Robert returned to his new office, he found Diane Chen waiting. For him, tablet in hand. We need to discuss marketing strategy, she said without preamble. The Jenkins name carries powerful symbolism, but we need to position this correctly for different market segments. Robert gestured for her to sit. Miss Chen, I'll be honest, marketing isn't my expertise. No, she agreed, but authenticity is. And that's precisely what we need. She swiped through slides on her tablet. We've drafted some concepts for the Riverside launch. I'd value your input. The presentation displayed polished graphics featuring sleek, high-tech imagery of the purification system, design elements that made Robert's garage-built prototype look like something from a science fiction film. It's very shiny, he commented. Chen studied him. You don't like it. It doesn't look like something built to help people, Robert said. It looks like something built to impress investors. To his surprise, Chen smiled. Exactly the feedback I hoped for. She switched to a different set of images, simpler, more functional designs that emphasized accessibility and practical application. Wells thought you'd prefer this approach, less corporate, more community-focused. Robert nodded. Yes, that looks like something my neighbors would trust. Good. We'll proceed with this direction. Chen paused. Wells has changed the marketing, budget allocation as well. 50% will now go to education programs, teaching communities to maintain and eventually produce components locally. Robert looked at her in surprise. That's not what I expected. None of this is what any of us expected, Chen replied with unusual candor. Wells hasn't slept in his penthouse since your demonstration. He's been working around the clock, restructuring priorities across the company. She leaned forward. Whatever you showed him that night didn't just impress him. It transformed him. After Chen left, Robert sat at his new desk, overwhelmed by the day's events. He glanced at his phone. 17 missed calls, mostly from reporters who had somehow obtained his number. News of his story had leaked, and the media was hungry for details of the janitor-turned-executive whose invention could revolutionize global water access. He ignored the calls, dialing only one number. Dad, Sarah answered on the first ring. How's the first day going? Are they treating you well? It's surreal, he admitted. I have an office bigger than our apartment. Sarah laughed. Send pictures. More importantly, we're starting a pilot at the Riverside Community Center. Dr. Rivera, she's incredible by the way, thinks we could have it running within 2 weeks. That's fantastic. My department chair nearly fell out of her chair when I told her about the partnership. She wants to involve our graduate program in the environmental impact studies. They talked for several more minutes, the conversation grounding Robert amid the whirlwind of his new reality. When he hung up, a notification appeared on his computer screen. All hands meeting, main auditorium, 3 p.m. As 3 p.m. approached, Robert made his way to Horizon's main auditorium, a space he had cleaned countless times but never sat in as an attendee. The uncertainty of proper protocol gripped him. Should he sit in front, befitting his new title, or in back, where he felt more comfortable? He compromised, choosing a seat midway down the auditorium as employees filed in. Some nodded in recognition, others whispered as he passed. The invisibility of janitorial work had been replaced by a different kind of conspicuousness. Precisely at 3 p.m., Alexander Wells took the stage, commanding immediate silence from the assembled staff. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began. "Today marks a significant pivot for Horizon Technologies." He paused, scanning the audience. "For too long, we've defined innovation narrowly, as technological advancements that generate profit. We've measured success by market share rather than meaningful impact." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was not Wells' typical quarterly address. "Yesterday, Horizon entered into a partnership that will fundamentally reshape our priorities." Wells gestured toward where Robert sat. "Many of you know Robert Jenkins as a member of our facilities staff. Today, I'm introducing him as our new Chief Innovation Officer and the inventor of a water purification technology that outperforms anything currently available." All eyes turned to Robert. Wells continued, "The Jenkins purification system will become Horizon's top deployment priority, beginning with our own community. Effective immediately, 30% of our R&D budget is reallocated to clean water technologies, with the Jenkins system as our flagship initiative." The announcement sent shockwaves through the audience. 30% of Horizon's massive research budget represented billions in resources suddenly redirected. "This is not charity," Wells emphasized. "This is sound business aligned with moral imperative. Clean water isn't a luxury, it's a human right, and Horizon will lead in making it universally accessible." He outlined the Riverside pilot, the planned production scaling, and the formation of Jenkins Clean Water Technologies as a division within Horizon. "Some of you may wonder why this shift, why now?" Wells concluded. "The answer is simple. Because it's right, it's necessary, and because we can. And perhaps most importantly, because sometimes the most valuable innovations come from where we least expect them." As the meeting adjourned, Robert found himself surrounded by Horizon employees. Engineers offering collaboration, researchers suggesting applications, marketing staff eager to tell his story. The janitor who had moved through these halls, unnoticed for 15 years, was now at the center of the company's attention. One voice cut through the crowd. "Mr. Jenkins." Robert turned to find a young woman in a facilities uniform, Maria Garcia, who had started on the cleaning staff just 3 months prior. "I just wanted to say," she said hesitantly, "we're all very proud." The whole night shift was watching the live stream of the meeting in the break room. Robert reached out to shake her hand. "Thank you, Maria. And please, it's still just Robert." She smiled. "Mr. Martinez says there's going to be a celebration in Riverside tonight. The whole neighborhood wants to congratulate you." As the crowd dispersed, Robert checked his watch. It was nearly 5 p.m., when he would normally have been starting his janitorial shift. Instead, he was heading home early to attend a community celebration in his honor. The incongruity wasn't lost on him. In many ways, his life had been divided into before and after that moment in the conference room, when he had finally spoken up. As Robert left the building, he passed the maintenance closet on the ground floor, his former domain. On impulse, he stepped inside, the familiar smell of industrial cleaners and dust evoking 15 years of diligent work. His old uniform still hung on a hook, his name badge slightly crooked where the pin had worn the fabric. "Thought I might find you here?" Robert turned to find Miguel Martinez, his former colleague and now the owner of Martinez Cleaning Services, standing in the doorway. "Hard to stay away?" Miguel asked with a knowing smile. "Just remembering," Robert replied. "It's strange how quickly things change." Miguel nodded. "One day you're fixing the vacuum cleaners, the next you're changing the world." He gestured toward the building's entrance. "Come on, Sarah's waiting outside. and half of Riverside is gathering at the community center. They're calling it Jenkins Day. Robert followed his friend outside, where Sarah waited beside her car. Behind her, a small crowd had gathered, mostly Riverside residents who had come to escort their neighbor home in celebration. "There he is!" someone called, and spontaneous applause erupted. Mrs. Patterson, who had lived next door to the Jenkins family for 20 years, pushed forward to embrace Robert. "We always knew you were special," she said, her eyes damp. "Joyce would be so proud today." The mention of his late wife sent a wave of emotion through Robert. How he wished she could have witnessed this moment, not the recognition or title, but the fulfillment of a promise they had made together during her illness, that someday no one else would suffer from contaminated water if they could help it. The impromptu procession to Riverside became a parade of honking cars and cheering neighbors. By the time they reached the community center, over 200 people had gathered. Families Robert had known for decades, children he had watched grow up, elders who had supported him after Joyce's passing. A hand-painted banner hung across the entrance. "Congratulations, Robert. Clean water for all." Inside, tables groaned with potluck dishes. Someone had brought a cake decorated with a crude but recognizable rendition of Robert's invention. Children darted between adults, excitement making them giddy beyond the usual sugar influence. Pastor Wallace, whose church had provided support when Joyce was ill, called for attention. "Today, we celebrate one of our own," he announced. "Robert Jenkins has always embodied the best of Riverside, hard-working, humble, and determined to make things better for everyone. Now the whole world will know what we've always known." A dozen more speeches followed, from Miguel, from community leaders, from the principal of the local school where Robert had volunteered despite his grueling work schedule. Each spoke not of the invention itself, but of the character of the man behind. And as the evening progressed, Robert found a quiet moment with Sarah near the edge of the celebration. "It's overwhelming," he admitted. Sarah squeezed his hand. "You deserve every bit of it, Dad. But I know that's not why you did it." Robert nodded toward where children were playing, carefree and joyful. "I did it for them. For their future." He paused. "And for your mom. She always believed the purpose of life was to leave things better than you found them." "Mission accomplished," Sarah said softly. Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected guest. Alexander Wells stepped into the community center, causing a ripple of whispers to spread through the crowd. The billionaire looked distinctly out of place in his tailored suit amid the casual gathering. He approached Robert with uncharacteristic hesitation. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "I wanted to see Riverside for myself." Robert introduced him to Sarah and Pastor Wallace, who welcomed him warmly despite the obvious curiosity his presence generated. "Would you like a tour?" Robert offered. Wells nodded. "I would." Together, they slipped away from the celebration, Robert guiding Wells through the streets of Riverside. He showed him the elementary school with its aging pipes, the community garden, where residents grew vegetables because the local grocery stores stocked only processed foods, the clinic where Dr. Patel treated illnesses often linked to water quality. "This is where it's real," Robert explained as they walked, "not in boardrooms or laboratories, but in people's daily lives." Wells absorbed it all in silence, occasionally asking questions that revealed his growing understanding. As they approached Robert's modest home, the CEO finally spoke. "I've been asking myself why you never became bitter," he said. "Working in that building, watching prosperity that excluded your community, being ignored when you tried to contribute. Most people would have given up or grown resentful." Robert considered the question. "I suppose it comes down to purpose," he said finally. "Joyce and I always believed our circumstances didn't define us. Our response to them did. And solving problems gave meaning to difficult times." Wells nodded slowly. "Emma used to say something similar. We can't control what happens, but we can control what we build from it. He looked around at the neighborhood, seeing it with new eyes. She would have loved what you've built. When they returned to the community center, the celebration was still in full swing. Word of Wells' presence had spread, and many residents approached to thank him for partnering with their Robert. The billionaire engaged with each person, listening more than speaking, a rarity for a man accustomed to commanding attention. As the evening wound down, Wells pulled Robert aside. "I've been thinking about what you said about purpose. It's been missing from Horizon and from my life for too long." He handed Robert a folded document. "This is for tomorrow's discussion, but I wanted you to see it tonight." Robert opened it to find plans for the Emma Wells Foundation for Water Equity, a separate non-profit entity funded by Wells's personal fortune, dedicated to deploying the Jenkins system in underserved communities worldwide. "What do you think?" Wells asked. Robert studied the document, emotion tightening his throat. "I think your sister would be proud," he said finally. Wells nodded, his usual business facade momentarily transparent enough to reveal the boy who had lost everything and built an empire to fill the void. "There's something else," Wells added. "The press conference next week. I'd like to hold it here in Riverside, not at Horizon headquarters." Robert looked surprised. "Here, why?" "Because this is where the story is. Not in our corporate showcases, but in communities like this one." Wells gestured around them. "People need to see the problem to understand why the solution matters." As Wells departed, Sarah rejoined her father. "What was that about?" Robert showed her the foundation document. "I think we've unleashed something bigger than a water filter," he said. "Wells isn't just adopting the technology, he's embracing its purpose." Sarah studied him. "And how does it feel, being the catalyst for all this?" Robert watched as the last of the celebration wound down, community members helping each other clean up, children collecting leftover cake, elderly neighbors being carefully escorted home. "It feels like something your mother always said," he replied softly. "The measure of your life isn't what you accomplish, but what you inspire others to do." Later that night, as Robert sat on his porch watching the neighborhood settle into evening quiet, his phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Jackson, prototype installation at Community Center scheduled for Friday. "Rivera wants you to lead the team personally." Another text followed, this one from Wells. "Board meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m. Prepare for resistance from traditional business units. Bring your notebook, the one with all the failures. I want them to see what persistence looks like." Robert tucked his phone away, gazing up at the stars barely visible through the city's light pollution. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: corporate politics, production logistics, the intimidating prospect of public speaking to a global audience. But tonight, he allowed himself to savor a simple truth. The barriers between worlds were more permeable than anyone had imagined. A janitor's midnight work had breached the walls between corporate power and community need, between profit and purpose, between being invisible and being truly seen. As Robert finally went inside, the light in his modest home shone like a beacon. In Riverside, a reminder that innovation didn't always wear expensive suits or emerge from prestigious institutions. Sometimes it wore work boots, carried the scent of pine cleaner, and changed the world anyway. 6 months after Robert Jenkins walked into that conference room, the Riverside Community Center hummed with activity. Children laughed as clean water flowed from taps that once dispensed rust-colored liquid. Mothers filled bottles without fear. Elderly residents no longer needed to trek across town for safe drinking water. The Jenkins purification system, now installed in every public building in Riverside, had transformed daily life. Water-related hospital visits had dropped by 73%. School attendance was up. Property values were rising as word spread about the neighborhood's revolutionary water technology. But today marked an even more significant milestone. Robert stood on a temporary stage erected outside the community center, watching as residents gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony of the Riverside Manufacturing Facility, the first community-owned production center for the Jenkins system components. Sarah stood beside him, beaming with pride. In the front row sat Alexander Wells, almost unrecognizable from the cold executive who had dismissed Robert 6 months earlier. His corporate armor, the tailored suits and careful expressions, had given way to casual attire and genuine smiles. Beside him sat Dr. Jackson and the technical team that had helped refine Robert's invention. "Ready?" Sarah whispered as pasteur. Wallace concluded his opening prayer. Robert nodded, stepping forward to address the crowd. "6 months ago, I was a janitor with an idea," he began, his voice steady despite his lingering discomfort with public speaking. "Today, we're not just celebrating clean water in Riverside, we're celebrating the beginning of Riverside's economic transformation." He gestured toward the converted warehouse behind him. "This facility will employ 27 residents initially, manufacturing components for systems being deployed across the country. The Emma Wells Foundation is providing training and certification for every employee." Applause rippled through the audience. "But this is about more than jobs," Robert continued. "It's about ownership. Horizon Technologies has structured this as a community cooperative. 51% of this facility belongs to Riverside itself, with profits returning directly to neighborhood development." More applause, louder this time. "None of this happened because I'm special," Robert said, his humility unchanged by success. "It happened because sometimes the best solutions come from people who live with the problems every day. It happened because an invention built at a kitchen table was finally seen by someone with the power to scale it." His gaze found Wells in the audience. "And it happened because people can change, corporate priorities can shift, invisible barriers can fall when we recognize our shared humanity." As Robert stepped back, Wells took the stage. The billionaire surveyed the crowd, not with the calculating assessment of potential consumers, but with the genuine connection of a partner in a shared mission. "When I first saw Robert's invention, I recognized its technical brilliance immediately," Wells began. "What took me longer to recognize was its moral imperative." He paused, unaccustomed to such personal disclosure in public settings. "Many of you know that we've now deployed Jenkins systems in 37 communities across 3 countries. What you may not know is that each location follows this model: local manufacturing, community ownership, sustainable operation." Wells gestured toward the facility. "This isn't charity, it's justice. It's innovation with integrity. It's business, as it should be done." After the speeches concluded and the ceremonial ribbon was cut, Robert walked through the manufacturing floor with Sarah and Wells. Local residents who had completed training demonstrated the production process, their pride evident in every explanation. "Ms. Patterson is supervising quality control," Robert noted, pointing out his longtime neighbor inspecting finished components. "She worked in manufacturing for 20 years before her plant closed. Now she's training the next generation." Wells nodded approvingly. "The retention rate for employees here is nearly perfect. That's unheard of in most manufacturing operations." "People work differently when they're building something that helps their own community," Sarah observed. As they completed the tour, a commotion near the entrance caught their attention. A group of journalists had arrived, cameras ready, shouting questions about the Janitor billionaire rumors. Robert sighed. The media fascination with his story had only intensified after the Jenkins system began winning international awards. Last month's Forbes cover, featuring him and Wells under the headline "The Unlikely Revolution," had triggered a new wave of attention. "I'll handle this," Wells said, moving to intercept the press. "Enjoy your moment with the community." Robert, nodded gratefully, slipping away with Sarah to rejoin their neighbors at the celebration. They found Miguel and his family enjoying refreshments by the community garden, now thriving with the reliable water supply. The Martinez Cleaning Services empire continues to grow, Miguel announced proudly. We just secured the contract for the new hospital extension. That's wonderful, Robert replied. How many employees now? 43, all with full benefits, Miguel said, following your example of how to treat people right. As the afternoon progressed, Robert found a quiet moment alone with Wells on the community center steps. The Riverside model is getting attention from other corporations, Wells remarked. 3 CEOs called me this week asking about our community cooperative approach. Robert smiled. Turns out doing the right thing can be contagious. Wells nodded thoughtfully. The board presentation next week will show something they can't ignore. Our stock is up 18% since we pivoted toward the Jenkins initiative. Ethical innovation is proving more profitable than our previous approach. And the international deployments? Robert asked. On schedule, sites in Ghana, Philippines, and Peru will be operational by year's end. Wells hesitated. There's something else. I've been approached about a humanitarian innovation prize nomination. For you. Robert shook his head. That's unnecessary. Perhaps, Wells agreed. But recognition matters. It creates new possibilities for others. He studied the man beside him. Still humble, still focused on solutions rather than accolades. 6 months ago, I laughed at a janitor's invention. Today, that janitor is teaching Fortune 500 companies a new way to define success. It still feels surreal, Robert admitted. Yesterday, I found myself checking the maintenance closets at Horizon out of habit, Wells laughed. Old patterns die hard. I caught myself canceling a community meeting last week because it conflicted with a golf game with investors. He shook his head. Emma would have been furious with me. Speaking of Emma, Robert said, Sarah's environmental engineering team completed their 5-year projection report. The Jenkins systems will provide clean water access to an estimated 12 million people by 2030. That's a legacy she would be proud of. Wells was silent for a moment, emotion briefly overtaking his usual composure. Thank you, he said finally, not just for the invention, but for the reminder of what matters. As sunset painted Riverside in warm hues, the celebration continued. Children played in the community splash pad, once abandoned due to water safety concerns, now the heart of neighborhood gatherings. Elderly residents shared stories of how the water had changed from threat to blessing. Young entrepreneurs pitched ideas for complementary innovations to Wells, who listened with genuine interest. Robert watched it all unfold, marveling at how a single moment of courage, raising his hand in that conference room 6 months ago, had catalyzed such transformation, not just of water systems, but of human systems, of assumptions about who could innovate and who deserved to be heard. Later that night, as Robert walked home with Sarah, they paused at the intersection where the Riverside welcome sign now proudly proclaimed, "Home of the Jenkins Purification System." "Dad," Sarah said, linking her arm through his. "Mom would be so proud today." Robert nodded, emotion tightening his throat. She always said true innovation comes from love, from caring enough about a problem to solve it for others, not just yourself. "The world is finally catching up to what she knew all along," Sarah replied, "and what you proved with every late night at that kitchen table." As they continued their walk, Robert reflected on the journey from invisibility to impact. The world might celebrate him as the janitor whose invention made a billionaire cry, but he knew the deeper truth. Real change happens when we see each other's humanity across the barriers we create. When we recognize that innovation can come from any mind dedicated to serving others. In his pocket, he still carried his old employee badge, Robert Jenkins, Facilities, a reminder that titles don't define contribution and that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas emerge from the people society overlooks. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.